Okay? So here's the fancy academic one. Trauma is a boundary violation that disturbs one's sense of safety. It produces an overwhelming, distressing, psychophysiological, meaning mind, body, spirit response, right? So in that context, trauma is something, it's not just that something bad happened, right? Because frankly, bad things happen to all of us, right? But all bad things don't produce trauma. Trauma is when my core is shaken to the extent that I no longer feel safe in my body, in my family, in the world, right? So that's what's the trauma, not necessarily the event, but what are the effects that I'm left with from that event, right? So there's the fancy definition. The regular definition that I like to use when I'm working with my clients is trauma is when something happened that wasn't supposed to happen, or something didn't happen that was supposed to happen, right? And because of that, again, I'm shaken to my core, right? And so with that sort of level set of what we mean when we talk about trauma, I want to pose this question to maybe a couple of you. I don't want all of you to feel like you have to answer unless there's some burning response. But as we think about the different sort of contextual locations you have in the academy, in the community, in the church, what would you say are some of the primary traumatic responses or traumatic experiences that you see people dealing with in your context? And maybe a follow-up to that is like, how did you know that this was a traumatic response? What are some things that you're seeing?
I actually want to start there because the church this week went through a very traumatic experience. We were celebrating our Women's Day, and we put together this choir of what we thought was going to be 100 women that turned out to be 185. But in that space, those women bonded when they were rehearsing. And so Sunday evening, Sunday afternoon, having lunch with the guest preacher, get a call. 3 of the members of the choir have been in a very uncertain accident, and they weren't sure any of them were going to make it. On my way to the hospital, so we split up. 2 were at one hospital, and 1 was at another. We passed this car. The whole front end was turned in, and the driver's side door and the passenger door behind the driver was completely crushed. And I always pray when I pass those types of accidents, I just pray that God, just allow them to make it through. Not knowing that these were 3 women who had just sung in the choir, had gone out to lunch, and were on their way back to pick up the car. And so the call that I got was, they don't think one of them is going to make it. 2 of them went to one, and 1 went to the other. So we split up. But here's the thing. You're feeling that, and then you have to go and minister to people and perhaps family that are totally traumatized. And I say that to say, when it happens, because sometimes, it's trauma from our childhood that we haven't dealt with or any other type. But when that happens, it puts you automatically in your ministry mode, and I got to pull it all together so that I can meet everybody else's needs. But along the way, you're grieving too, because you get to the hospital, they don't know whether they're going to make it. They got brain bleed, they got a punctured colon, they got 2 broken arms at the other hospital, crushed face. Just so many things. And all 3 of them, over the course of this week, have been through 3, and 1 has been through 4 surgeries. Each of them has been through 3. But I had a member who had met them during the choir time, decided she was going, and to visit, and she went over, and when she saw them hooked up to so much, you can't tell whether they're going to make it. And she had recently, not 3 months ago, had her own accident, and that made her feel like, how did I make it? And it's possible that they're not going to make it. And that's, that's the kind of trauma that I think that just drops in your lap, and you have to emotionally deal with it and acknowledge you might have some issues, along the way, trying to be whole for everybody else. And sometimes I'm going to stop there because there's much I could say about it. But the family is traumatized. We were on the phone with them. The entire choir is traumatized. Everybody's traumatized because at this point, we don't know what the outcome is going to be. So we have to trust God's going to do his part as we do our part.
Yeah, in line with that, as a minister, as a priest, you're faced with a challenge of being courageous in the midst of situations that might force you to begin to defend God. Mm-hmm. And that's not what we ought to do. I remember in situations I've gone, and these are young couples, they just had a kid, and they were holding the baby to die. The grandparents were there, and they're asking you questions, why did God allow this? And the easy thing to do in the midst of that trauma, because you're dealing with your own trauma, of how do you become strong in a situations that you have no answer or that you can't even explain. The danger is to defend God. And the danger is to begin to say nice things that you feel is what they needed to hear. Things like, God knows. At that point, you're causing more danger in that situation, because then their mind goes back to probably they did something wrong, that God was punishing them. So how I deal with situations like that is when I get a call, I just invite the Holy Spirit. And then in certain situation, I go for the first few minutes, I say nothing and just hold hands. And then I remind them that there's nothing I would say that could change the situation, but that I know who could, and we invite the grace of God. Because at that point, the only thing that I could do is to offer grace so that they can acknowledge their humanity and be realistic about their feelings, but also trusting in the divine that could pull them out through that moment. So it's a very serious situation in ministry. But we need to know our place. We are not God. We are just instruments.
One of the experiences, or I guess 3 experiences that I recall, homicide, suicide, and then I'll put it this way, just a job loss, language intentional. When I think about the homicide and the suicide, the reactions of the families was very interesting. Being able to help them to process, understanding the immediate loss that they experienced, the questions that came up, particularly in light of the suicide, the concern on where that person is eternally, what the possibilities were for them. And the way I approached it was just listening, just hearing the heart, hearing the concern, hearing, the despair, hearing the questions, and giving them space to be able to articulate the concerns, the brokenness, the hurt, all of the stuff that they were experiencing, just making room for that. And then briefly responding, because I remember as I listened to a family member say, is it possible that? And I said, oh, of course. I said, with God, all things are possible. I said, don't you realize how big God is, and that sometimes the decisions that we make don't impact God's intentionality toward us, and that to hear the sigh of relief, she needed to hear that in order for her to move on. And so we continue to reach out and just touch base every now and again. And it's fascinating how that has impacted other members of the family, and they're just, thank you for what you've done. And then I go to that job loss, and I said just a job loss, because sometimes we think that that's not traumatic. But when I started thinking about how the job loss impacted a particular individual, it's almost like their whole world was gone. Not only did it shut the door on that particular, it impacted the ability to do some other things, you know. And you know, I saw the self-doubt, I saw the questioning, you know, and I look at person that's like, you know, do you realize how many gifts and skills that you have? You know, but because of the trauma, they weren't able to realize those things. And so it's just important to come alongside persons, because you can't fast track some things. Some things you just have to allow to play out over time and just be there when you're needed.
Something that I think about is this idea of internalized race-based trauma. I work a lot with the Black women and girls and in the community, and even looking at our social determinants of health, how trauma affects the mind, body, and spirit, and looking at how we have this hyper-vigilant, this over-arousal experience that will always tense, if you will. You might even notice that with ourselves. Definitely I notice with myself and those that I serve, always this tense, on guard, defensive, and ready to respond and act. And that we know is not good for the body. But we carry that with us all the time, and we respond in that way. And so picking up on that, the idea of the stress that we carry in our body because of trauma and unhealed trauma, and how do you unpack that? And then we know that in many times in our Black and brown communities that we're not taught to talk about it. Right. Trauma is silenced, and then we can't respond. And so trying to create spaces that are trauma-informed, but being able to respond to that, and to be able to do that. And so, just for sake of time, but just thinking about that race-based traumatic stress, thinking about how we respond to it, how we carry that in our body, and how it affects our health, psychologically, but also our physical health and the disease that we carry.
And I'll just offer, just because I know I'm in a more academic setting, and so just some of the things that I know of in the academic setting is we all had a collective trauma with COVID-19. Let's be real honest. We all had a collective trauma with politics, and we'll just leave it at that, right? We'll leave it right there. But those are currently engaging, exactly. Currently praying deeply. But those are collective traumas that we all experience, whether you were a teacher, a student, wherever you were. Do we go online? What's happening? What if I don't know how to teach on? I mean, just all of the myriad of things. How do we go back in person? What does that mean? And then once we are, I mean, I've had students, I'm going to use some language that involves abuse, so if that is something that's hard for you, I want you to, there we go. But I've had students who have come to me that have experienced rape, that have experienced domestic violence, that have, again, I teach seminary students. So these are students that are ministers that have been hurt by people in their congregations. You want to talk about church hurt, they have been hurt by the deacons. They have been hurt by the pastor. They have been hurt by, some of them are the pastor and were hurt by members of the congregation. So literally it's a myriad of people that have been hurt, and that shows up by them no longer wanting to do the work because they're like, well, why, God? Why? Why do I need to come in and show up for this Bible class? Why do I need to talk about Christian education when you let this happen to me? Or all of these myriad of things. So it shows up and they're not doing their work. They're not showing up as themselves anymore. They're not washing. They're not, I mean, literally the myriad of ways it shows up. And so how I guess part of that question was how I try to attend to that is when I see it, I say something. Hey, sis, what's going on? Let's talk. Let's do this. I have an open door policy in my office. I have jump ropes. I have hula hoops. I have paints. I have a blanket and a pillow. No questions asked policies, just whatever you need. But remembering that our bodies need certain things. And I also make sure I have a list of amazing therapists, because guess what? I am not like our good sis here and have a license in therapy. And so also part of my do less harm is remember, I can only do so much. And then I can refer to people that can do a lot more, right? Hey, I can be here, and then when I can't, I know someone who can. I have a Rolodex of great people to send you to. Here's an online one if you want to go online. Let me give you the resources, because I know I can only do so much, and I'm not going to cause further harm, but I will be here with you. I will help you get what you need, and then I'll help you move forward, and then I'll check on you and make sure you're good.
And I just think in the faith community, we have to understand when we have reached our level of experience, and if we are counseling spiritually, We are not a psychiatrist or a psychologist. And so we have to know when to hold them and know when to fold them and refer them over to someone else. And oftentimes, because members of your congregation, they're not comfortable going to somebody else. And so I, too, have a list. I have a list of persons I can refer them to, but so often they will continue to call because they feel safe with you. But I can only keep you safe for a certain amount of time and minister to you spiritually. But really, we need to get you to the experts, to those who are experienced, to be able to deal with some of that trauma.
And to recognize it's not a lack of faith if you go talk to someone else.
It isn't. It is not.
So my colleague Erica Brooks was over there clapping as you were talking. She's another licensed professional in the area if you need to add somebody to your list, right? That's Erica Brooks. So a part of, you all have been sort of talking about the types of things people experience. A couple of people have brought up what happens in the body. So I just want to say a little bit about that before we move into this next piece. Dr. Pannell talked about this in terms of the impact of trauma on the body, right? One of the things we know about the way our bodies respond to threat is that whether you're having a conflict with your partner or a near miss on a car accident or a house fire or a bad review at work, your body responds to all of those things as if you're about to fight a bear. Seriously. All your body knows is there's a threat and I'm preparing for action, right? And so many of you have heard the fight or flight response, right? What's happening is there's a chemical in your body called cortisol that's building up in your body so that if you have to, I was going to use a word that I wouldn't use in church, if you have to prepare for action, your body is ready, right? But what happens if it's a work-based conflict and my body is sitting in my chair preparing for action that doesn't come, right? That chemical that prepares me to fight at some point turns on my body because it doesn't have anywhere to go. And so there's lots of evidence that those of us who are experiencing that chronic threat are at a much higher risk for chronic disease because our bodies don't get a chance to rest. And so you're going to your doctor because you're having IBS symptoms, or you can't get your blood pressure regulated, or your blood sugar is spiking, or you're having trouble sleeping, or trouble concentrating, and the medical doctors are all saying, nothing's wrong here. And what they want to tell us is that our greater risk for heart disease and diabetes is just because we eat fried chicken and drink sweet tea. No. It's because, some of us do that, right? But it's also because as Black and brown folks, we live in high alert mode, right? Our nervous systems don't get a break. So when Dr. Lockhart says, play with Play-Doh, or color, or jump rope, or go outside and look at the clouds, right? A part of that is to remind your body about opportunities when it can be at rest, right? We live in a world where we're constantly fighting. And so the challenge for all of us in terms of being trauma-informed is how do we make our homes, our churches, and our classrooms places where our nervous systems can be at rest, right? That's what safety looks like. Because look, I walk everywhere I go, I'm going to be a Black woman. But I refuse to have to fight racism inside my home, right? I refuse to raise my children on high alert so they grow up with dysregulated nervous systems, right? I refuse to create a hostile educational environment so that my students feel like they have to fight me in order to get what they need, right? So when we talk about being trauma-informed, a part of it is like, how do we create an environment where our nervous systems get the sense that they can relax? even if it's only temporary, because I'm going back into a hostile world. But those breaks that we can offer each other, not only do they help us mentally and emotionally, they also help us in terms of longevity, because we're giving our bodies those breaks that we need. Okay, that was my rant for the day. So, a couple of you talked about this when I asked the earlier question. I just this feels so important that I really want to hone in on it, which is this question about where do we see the movement of God and the place of our faith in this discussion around trauma? Let's kind of bring that in an explicit way.
Yeah, we need to recognize who we are and separate it from what happens to us. That way it becomes easy to find God in the situation. But what happens when crisis moment happen, it shuts your opportunity to even see beyond the moment. So every promises of God becomes an illusion.
Wow.
So faith becomes a gift you offer to yourself in order to take the responsibility of handling whatever it is that is happening to you and put it on God. Because when you speak to people who are going through crisis moment, the questions they ask tell you the place of faith in that moment. They begin to ask the question of a victim, why me? They're already defeated. There's nothing else. It's all about me. Why me and why not other person? But the reality and the presence of faith helps to speak and ask the questions of God. What is it you want me to know? What is it you are doing with this situation? So God is very important in our journey. God is very important in the way we experience and accept. Because it's because of the absence of faith that makes us to deny, reject, or dismiss. And then it goes to our subconscious, only to be triggered at every moment that situations that confronts our boundaries happen. So faith and God is really important. And the question of why does a good God allow bad things to happen to good people, that will be answered in heaven. Because you can't, you keep asking it.
I was just thinking of my predecessor, Dr. Charles Jones, used to say all the education that he experienced, he had to go through all of that education to find out what his grandmother told him was true. You know, and the song says, we've come this far by faith. You know, when we look back at our history, when we look back at our intersection with and interaction with God, God has kept us in spite of everything that's tried to take us out. God, the fact that we're here right now meant that the enemy wasn't successful in taking us out, you know, as a people. And so when we think about the role of faith, we have to just remember what God told us, allow that to be activated in our lives, see the value of our history, our experience. You know, it's not that we can rub a lamp and our problems are going to go away. But we have found, and I was even thinking about what was said last night, Dr. Bryant, you know, whatever you're experiencing, God has a way of giving us what we need to, in spite of. You know, we are here in spite of. And for me, that's faith informed, you know, how God works it out in spite of.
One thing I think about is going back to our faith, our ancestry, as far as thinking about how do people handle suffering. And we know that in our communities, we think about the mourner's bench, or again, the wailing wall. We think about, you know, this idea of weeping and lament. And lots of times we want to run away from that or not acknowledge that suffering is a part of life. And I also think that we want to provide spaces for that so people can lament and look at healing. We know that God has given us a purpose. We know that God is a God of healing, and we are called to be vessels of healing. and also of hope. And so as we look at, for instance, scriptures, Isaiah 61, mend the brokenhearted, again, put on a crown instead of despair, right? So we're looking at how do we transform these harms into healing? And we have a calling to do that through our faith and looking at faith and justice and suffering and lament on that as well.
So I see this two ways. So one is with my playful brain. Excuse my allergies, I know you can hear it. So one is my playful brain, one is I'm a theological educator, right? So if I'm looking at this with my theological educator brain, I'm thinking about liberation theologies. I'm thinking about how I'm thinking about Fannie Lou Hamer and I'm not free until we're all free. And what that means to do the work, what that means to call out systems and to decolonize them, to realize it's not just us, it's the system around us that has allowed it to occur. I'm thinking about womanist theology. I'm thinking about mujerista theology. I'm thinking about all of these ways that we need to remember that it's a larger system, and how are we actively pushing and fighting back against it for the liberation for all of us, how we can all get there together, and how that's a call that God has called for us. That is a call that has been throughout the entire Bible, throughout all of that God is trying to get people free. God is trying to heal people and save people regardless of what people are thinking. Even if that means he has to turn over a table or two, that's okay. We got to get what we got to get, right? And then the playful side of me is, this is going to sound blasphemous at first. Just roll with me. Okay, so when I read the Bible, I cackle. I laugh hard because I think about a talking donkey named Balaam. I mean, have y'all met a talking donkey? I think about creation itself, a clownfish, a giraffe. My kids love a giraffe, a long-necked giraffe. How do you read this and not think about how we have such a creative creator? We are meant to create. Why are we not creating? What are we doing? So why are we, again, I have all the playthings in my office because I feel like our body needs that. We're meant to do that. God has called us to that. Literally in the works, there is play, there is dancing, there is moving. We're called to that too. So for me, I feel like all of that is part of being called into this trauma-informed world, using all of these resources. We don't all find God the same way, so why are we all finding healing the same way? Remembering that it looks all kinds of ways, whether you're playing, whether you're a theological liberation theology, it needs all of it, because what might not work for one person is going to work for someone else. So how do we have all of that in our arsenal, right? Like, I don't like that arsenal word, but how do we have all of that in our toolbox, in our fanny pack, wherever you want to keep it? There you go.
And I think for those of us who've been walking with the Lord a long time, we know how to walk in faith. But sometimes the people we minister to don't understand that. And they don't want to talk about God. They don't want to talk about church. And sometimes it has to be a lunch. Or sometimes I just have to say, just show up here. I'll meet you there. Just show up. And then when that level of trust is built, then we can work on increasing faith. But it is definitely a journey. And when we think about moments where we have truly been traumatized, and I can think of a moment in life where I was there, and I said, "Oh Lord, just come get me." But when I got through that season, that deep season of depression, I had to laugh because I said, "God, I am so glad you don't listen to me." I am so thankful you don't listen to me. But I was responding out of my trauma and my pain. And so now, when I'm ministering to people, I want to hear them. I want to put them in spaces where I can just listen and build up a level of trust to help them increase their faith.
One of the things Dr. Bryant said a lot of stuff last night. So if you weren't there, go watch the live stream, right? One of the things she said last night was, even when bondage is your condition, it's not your identity, right? And as I'm thinking about what we're saying now, for me, a part of our faith is to hold the imagination for people to see themselves as being in a different place than what their trauma has convinced them is the truth, right? And even, I love the story of Elijah in 1 Kings. He goes into a cave and he's like, "God, these people are out of control. You can just go ahead and take me. Like, I'm done with this. You can have it. Just kill me now. I'm here in the cave," right? And what happens? An angel comes with food and says, "Eat and rest," right? Eat and rest. And so, sometimes our natural inclination is to try to convince people out of how they're feeling. To say, oh no, well, can't you see all these other things? And sometimes the call is really to just acknowledge the pain is so great that all I can do is just try to exist, right? And our role, even without trying to convince people of something different, is the way I like to frame it for my clients is like, I will hold the hope until you're able to hold it for yourself, right? If your view of your life is confined to this, I can be with you for that. And until you're able, I can hold a more expansive view of what God has possible for you, about what God can do. And when you're ready, when you've done all the lamenting you need to do in this space, that's a piece of what can open you up to the possibility of more, right? Yeah. So I want to offer this question, because this, again, is something that you all have brought up, and I think it's important to make explicit. Many of you have talked about this tension of being in a place of serving, holding space for people who might have been experiencing trauma, and also reckoning with your own reactions and experiences, right? So can you talk a little bit about what practices you engage in for yourself so that you can show up in ways that are trauma-informed where you're called to serve?
I can talk about that a little bit as well. I particularly went through a time when my mother passed away suddenly. I had a change of position. I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and so many other things were happening. COVID came as well. And people were used to me being the minister, the counselor, the educator, the mentor, and the middle child, and everything else that comes with that, and being there and leaning on me for that. But then I was in a space where I'm drowning. I need help and support. I need boundaries. I can't be there. I can't show up the same way. And so really, as many of us, especially during COVID and the loss of many people, had to take a time and really putting these things into practice. I thought I was practicing it, but when it really hit the fan, if you know what I mean, then I had to look at that. So I will say this idea of radical self-love, right? Loving yourself and thinking about this. Angela Davis talks about this and others that look at social justice movements. We give so much, but then you can notice in a pattern of people that are dying early, right? And of stress and of giving, but how do you love yourself in spite of, right? No matter what, I'm going to love myself radically. Why is it radical? Because the society, as black and brown people particularly, do not love me in the way that I deserve to be loved. Mindfulness practices as well. I felt that was universal, whether someone is coming from a church background or not. This idea of mindfulness practice, contemplative practices, right? We know a lot, again, thinking about how do we contemplate, how do we think and be quiet, be still and know that I'm God. Like many of us, I go, but am I being still? Am I dealing with my own self in silence? Self-reflection as well. And then we know prayer, meditation, but I think just intentionally caring for myself and my body, exercise, walking every single day is something that saved my life, because it was, again, that movement and also meditating and using my body to get rid of some of those toxins. And we know, of course, even changing our eating habits as well, I think, is important. So being very intentional and doing that on a daily, something small, on a daily basis. And last thing I'll just say again, telling people I cannot right now. No. Like, I need to care for myself because my cup is empty, and if I don't have anything to give, then I can't give to you. And who's going to take care of me, right? It has to be ourselves. We have to have that radical self-care and love.
I've recognized it's a continual process. My grandmother would say, sit down before your body sits you down. And I hear her saying that from heaven, you know, sit down before your body sits you down. When your body sits you down, you're not going to get up too quickly. And so I have to continually hear that, not just once, but continually remind myself that I'm just coming off of some time off, and that during that time off, I had to continually tell myself it's okay not to do anything. It's okay to acknowledge, what you're dealing with. It's okay I had to continually give myself permission to acknowledge whatever the situation was, and so I recognize that I'm a work in progress, and sometimes I'm a hard work in progress where you need other folks to come and say some things to you to remind you of the things that you're supposed to know for yourself, that it's easy for me to tell you, but it's hard for me to hear it myself. And so it's always good to have some folks around you. And again, this opportunity is wonderful. Even looking up definitions of words I thought I knew.
For me, similar to Thane, it's easy to tell people. So every day there are questions I reflect on. Who am I? A minister. Who am I called to be? And then what am I called to do? But sometimes if we are not able to put them where they belong, we will be dragging what am I called to do before who am I called to be. So understanding who I'm called to be helps me to practice 3 things I tell clients sometimes. You have a choice. Learn how to make a convincing no, and don't feel guilty about it. Saying no is not enough. You have to be convinced in the no you are saying. Because that way they understand that you have made a choice of yourself before what you are called to do, that you are being aware that your role as a minister is to walk people to the foot of the cross, not to yourself, which means you are part of that journey. And if you don't have the health to even have the clarity where the cross lie, it becomes difficult to even lead the people. So those are constant reminders. I don't succeed all the time, which is okay, because perfection happens in heaven. So until then, we'll keep trying, and that's what I practice.
And I think for me, understanding how to know it's okay to provide self-care, to have a spa day. To on the day that you have acknowledged as your day off, and I had to work at this because people felt like I was responsive. Thank you, Margie, Dr. Margie, for responding 24/7. And when I just started honoring my Monday off, it was so difficult for those I had trained to call me anytime to understand I'm not available. And so I use techniques like walking and mindfulness, and then, scheduling some days to go and just get a massage. And the other thing is, and I love that you helped me with this on Facts and Faith, is just stopping to breathe. Because sometimes I don't even think about the fact that I really haven't been breathing. So just taking those deep breaths. And I love to walk, and I tell this quick story because I was traumatized by this. I had a very dear friend who 2 years ago was killed because she was attacked by a pit bull while she was walking 2 doors down from her house. And I walk every day, and I walk with a stick and hear the dogs, but for almost a year, I was so traumatized, I would literally get up, get dressed to walk, and could not push myself out the door to walk. And it was impacting my body. And I went to the dermatologist because I was losing my hair. And I was like, I don't know if it's medication. It was really the stress of what I had been traumatized by. And a lot of times as ministers and clergy and those who people know, we'll hide those things that are happening to us as a result of it. But I was in a meeting with some ladies, and the lady was saying she's struggling with her hair. I said, guess what? I am too. I have alopecia, and it's because I'm stressed, and I need to walk this out in my life. And once, got in that place of, breathe, honor your Monday, have some self-care days, and do those things that really make you a healthier minister and to be able to serve people the way in which you need to serve it. And so I think we just have to honor what we say we're going to do.
For me, you heard me say a little bit that I like to play, so I'm the one that I do Play-Doh. I color, I bust out the hula hoop. I'm not always as good at it as I used to be. Won't let that go. The jump ropes, I do puzzles. I mean, whatever I'm feeling is what I really try to go with. I'm sure we're familiar with Trisha Hersey's book, Rest is Resistance. I like a nap or two. Whenever I can get it in, I'll try for that nap, even if it's 15 minutes. Set my alarm, close the door, lock it. I also have two little humans, 5 and 2, and they are wonderful and amazing. And one of the biggest things I've learned is that what care looks like for me has been different in different seasons of my life. How I cared for myself pre-kids was very different than when I had kids, after 1, and then now after 2. And just the space that I have to give myself more than anything is realizing that I had to give myself grace. Realizing that I was the hardest on myself. Being like, hey girl, it's been 2 years, you can't keep saying that's baby weight. Like, girl, come on. But just having grace with myself to say, hey sis, you're doing good. These kids, they have food, they're surviving, you just got up, they have clothes, they were good, they got to play. And so just having grace has been the biggest thing. And grace was saying, I can say no, and I don't owe you the whole backstory. Like that's been the hardest, is just saying no. And saying, letting that be enough to say that my story is mine, and you know should be enough for you too. You shouldn't need to know my why. You should respect my why. Everybody doesn't like that. So just having grace, having boundaries, and just, knowing when it's enough. That was enough emails today. I want to be present with my kids. That means I'm not going to have my phone with me. That means something might get missed. I'm okay with that now. It comes and goes. I know there are high volume seasons, but the intentionality, I think someone mentioned earlier, has been really important for me, and just realizing that it's going to look different and be intentional and have grace with myself with how that looks. Also recently, kickboxing. Yes, Lord. Whew. Just yes, Lord. In all the ways. I want to kick and punch. I didn't realize how much. All the things, but yeah. So just grace, intentionality, and kickboxing.
One of the things I would add to that people haven't mentioned that's been really important for me is recognizing I'm a person who's super introverted, so I could not talk to anybody for a week and be fine. But that actually doesn't divorce me from my need for community, right? And a piece of, for a lot of us, some form of relational violence has been traumatizing, but it can also be healing to have those meaningful relationships. And so for me, because I don't have a lot of need for other people, when I'm with people, it's deep, right? And so really thinking about who are the people in my life with whom there doesn't have to be any pretense. I can be fully myself. I don't have to show up as Dr. Brown and have it all put together, right? And so really prioritizing time with those people just as I prioritize my children and my work and the other things I'm exposed to, right? And so for me, being really intentional about having that relational time has also been really important. And, staying in therapy. Listen, I tell people my therapist has saved my life and the lives of many others. Many others. We thank God. But one of the things she told me, it's been years ago now, and it kind of exploded my brain at the time, but it's become really kind of a guiding reminder for me, is she said, what if you gave yourself permission to let people down? And I was like, I'm Dr. Jessica Young Brown. I don't let people down, right? But a part of what she was saying was like, a lot of us have these demands that we're placing on ourselves. And to be a human being is to acknowledge, just as you said, Father Tochi, perfection is actually not something that's accessible to me. So if I give up on being perfect, if I'm gonna do my best, because God is calling me to do my best, but sometimes doing my best actually means tapping out. Sometimes doing my best is saying, I thought I had capacity for this, but I won't be able to do it well. So I'm going to have to say no. And so that was really a gift for me, and I have to remind myself of it often. We have just a couple more minutes. So I want to check to see if folks in the audience have questions that they would like to pose to our panelists in our last couple minutes. Yeah, go ahead.
So when you all were talking about traumatizing situations and the ability, when you're talking about traumatizing situations and the ability to get yourself together to be able to minister. I sometimes have a problem with that. And the reason why is because there are moments when people need to see that we are human and not robots. And so if you can, and I'm not accusing you all of being robots, but I have seen as ministers, we go into that mode so much that people can't relate to us. How do you handle that?
I cry with them. But one of the things I had to ask God to do for me is to not allow my heart to become hardened, because I've ministered to so many people going through so many things. And so those moments where, like when my friend died, that was, her jugular was taken out by that pit bull. Yeah, they saw me cry. They saw me even on the pulpit the day of the funeral, expressing that, because the flip side of that is, my mind, body, and soul is not whole because I've held all of that in. But I do give myself permission to grieve, and there are certain people that will trigger that when they just look into my eyes, they can see that I'm struggling. And in those moments, I just let it go. So that's very real for those of us in the ministry. I don't know what others might say, but.
I was thinking of my son, how he would observe me in working with people in the congregation who've gone through things and ask the question, "It doesn't bother you, does it?" I said, "Oh, yes, it does." I said, "In that moment, I know I have a job to do." I said, "But I feel that, and I will communicate that, in my own way. Sometimes it's privately, sometimes it's in community, but I recognize what I need to do when I need to do it. But the congregation also knows. I think even when my mother died, I didn't realize how much that hit me until the Mother's Day, and I stood up to preach. And I lost it. It was so unexpected. I didn't know where it came from. And I ended up back sitting down, and the choir behind me, they were crying and everything. And I was like, what happened? It was just one of those moments where it just kind of caught me off guard, because I wasn't I thought I was to a place, that I could manage, and I wasn't. In that moment, it was very public.
Yeah, in my experience, sometimes there's a thin line to misunderstand that a minister does not care. But it's on the minister to understand who he's called to be. The incarnation is a perfect example for us. There are certain moments Jesus would do no healing, but he was present. He was present there until that presence would generate the situation and the moment for the healing to take place on its own. And we have an instance in the story of the road to Emmaus, when he was there just helping them, speaking, not presenting himself as Jesus or as Christ or anything, but just helping them to make sense with what God has said about what they were experiencing until he broke bread. Then they realized. But being present means that you understand at each moment what you can offer, and that you also know who can give what you cannot give. So that presence might be what they needed at that point But then God will use that moment and that presence that you have offered to do what he alone can do. But sometimes as a minister too, I do, avoid living in people's imagination or a narrative that they have created of who a minister should be. You are the minister, you know who you are called to be, because there are certain people you cannot help them. All you do is listen. And then, and one of the principles of informed trauma care is forming a very good support system. So then, in my church, we started couples ministry. Catholic priests don't marry. I have specialty in marriage and family, but I don't have the experience. So the ministry offer what I cannot. We have intentional youth group. I've been a youth for a long while, but I have to be present to them to invite me to how they want me to minister to them. But when what they're asking does not fit into what I can give, I will excuse myself and not feel bad. Because I can damage them and damage myself, and then prevent other people that might be needing my ministry the next day that opportunity.
So thank you all. Can we just celebrate our panelists? Thank you all so much for your wisdom and insights. Hopefully this has kind of whetted our appetites for the rest of the day. So we'll have a little bit of a break, and for the next couple of hours, so starting at 10 o'clock and then again at 11:15, we will have 4 concurrent workshops. They'll both run twice. You can choose which workshop you want to go to, so you can choose 2. Here in the sanctuary, Dr. Harry Simmons is going to talk about grief. The rest of our workshops and also lunch will be down this long back hallway here. We can have a caravan to those other spaces in the church. So in the chapel, Dr. Shanita Brown is going to be talking about intimate partner violence and domestic violence. Raise your hand, Dr. Shanita. In classroom 1, so classrooms 1 and 6, when you go down this long hallway, they're going to be up. There's a black flight of steps. They're going to be up the steps. We'll make sure everybody gets where they need to go. We won't let you get lost in Antioch. In classroom 1, Ms. Erica Brooks is going to talk about race-related stress and generational trauma. Ms. Brooks, wave your hand. And then in classroom 6, Dr. Brian Jones back there is going to talk about trauma-informed care with veterans. So you see, we have a wide range of opportunities. Again, choose 2, with the first class being at 10 in a few minutes. And then the second class instructors, you are on your honor to end class on time. If I need to act like principal and come around and remind you, I'm happy to do that. Okay, so the first workshop will be from 10 to 11. The second workshop will be from 11:15 to 12:15. At 12:15, we are all going to go to the fellowship hall. Again, all the way down this long hallway on the other end of the building. So all that cortisol you might have had with you when you came in, we're going to walk it off a little bit today. So at 12:15, we'll meet in the fellowship hall for lunch. And STVU community members, we are going to break into what we're calling listening circles while we're having lunch. So I'll give directions when we gather for lunch about what that last piece will be. And we'll give a blessing from lunch, because listening circles and lunch will be the last thing that we do today, okay? All right, so again, for classroom locations, here in the sanctuary, Dr. Harry Simmons is going to talk about grief. In the chapel, Dr. Shanita Brown is going to talk about domestic violence and intimate partner violence. In classroom 1, Miss Erica Brooks is going to talk about race-related stress and transgenerational trauma. In classroom 6, Dr. Brian Jones is going to talk about trauma-informed care with veterans. Okay? If you need to, all right, y'all gonna be ushers? Okay, amen. So if you need to grab some water, use the restroom, those things are out in this narthex. And then to access classroom 1, classroom 6, and chapel, you can go out these doors and just travel down the long hallway to get to your desired location. All right, arrive there by 11. Thank you.
10.
Sorry, 10. 10.
Don't arrive there by 11. Thank you.
Oh, Rachel wants to get a picture of us before we. You want us to stand or sit right? Okay.
I got like a seated picture, which is great. All y'all are.
Look, we got like 2 hours for the
Okay. All right, thank you. Keep those two scriptures in mind as a foundation for what we will do going forward. I realize I also have another handout just in case that's a little more detailed. I just want to ask if you could take one. There are 2 pages and pass it around. That would be good. There are four objectives, and this is on this handout in color. I mean, black and white that you have. 4 objectives for this presentation. The first one is to identify fundamental assumptions in the book of Job. All right, what are some of the assumptions that not only Job, that's in the book of Job, but that you and I make about God, about the world we live in, and about ourselves? All right, that's what we want to talk about right there. We want to define trauma and types of trauma. Now, I want to say this, that sometimes we need to know the difference between a crisis and a trauma. What's the difference? All right? And usually, grief is associated with crises and with trauma, okay? It just naturally comes with it. So we're going to define trauma and types of trauma. And then we have a case here. Now, I brought 2 cases. And see, I did not know that so my case will be the case of Mary Johnson, which will be the second case. I do have the case on John Doe, but I'm not going to do that because we have a veteran, we have another presenter who's working with trauma with veterans. So I'll use this one, the case of Mary Johnson. I'm going to hand that out to you. All right, and then the fourth objective is to identify theories and skills for trauma counseling. And what does that mean? We need something to help to guide us to work with folk who are traumatized. We cannot fly by the seat of our pants. We need to have something that we know has validity and reliability to help us to work with people who are dealing with trauma, who are suffering, who are grieving, and so forth. All right? All right. Turn the page for a minute. So what I want to do is to move into these 3 assumptions that Job makes. And these are fundamental assumptions, and they have to do with post-traumatic stress disorder that are in the book of Job. All right? The first assumption that the book of Job says in the scriptures that we read is that the world is benevolent. The world is good. Look at how the book of Job started out in those first scriptures. You got to look at that. The world is good. Secondly, the world is meaningful. Meaningful. I can go to worship. We're here worshiping. We're here for this presentation, and there are meaningful things that we choose to do in life. And so the assumption is the world is meaningful. I can go and I can do things, okay, and enjoy myself. Okay, that's an assumption. And then the third assumption is the self is worthy. All right, I'm a good person. You feel like you're a good person. You know right and wrong. You're going to choose to do right 99.9% of the time. All right. Let's say 100% then. All right. Now, but here's the thing that happened. Now, remember that. I want to keep that before you. The world is good. The world is meaningful. And the self is worthy. That all works until trauma. And that's what the book of Job is going to talk to us about trauma. That Job discovered, Job's experience was, the world ain't good. It's not benevolent. What's going on? I had all of this. I'm the richest man in the East. I got cattle, I got donkeys, I got everything. Then my children die. I got servants coming to me and telling me, and like my world is changing. And so one key word that is important to remember about trauma is that people's assumptions about the world they live in shatters. It shattered. The world is good. The world is meaningful. I'm worthy. And then all of a sudden, in the book of Job, God shows us an important lesson that in this life that we live, if we keep living, we are going to experience dissonance between assumptions and realities. If we keep on living, our assumptions about the world that we live in may be challenged, and often will be challenged. And so when that happens, we need to do something when our beliefs about God, beliefs about the world that we live in, and our beliefs about ourselves are shattered. Now, Job held on to his belief that he was a good man and that he did nothing wrong. But now his friends were saying, Job, you need to confess. You know, there was pressure on Job. That's peer pressure. You know, and you got to be strong and have some autonomy to withstand peer pressure and pressure from a lot of people who are close to you, who are telling you what they see that is different from your own reality in living, okay? And so then we have a traumatic experience. And when this happened to people, they need to reinterpret and reauthor their assumptions about the world they live in, about the God they serve, and about themselves. Are we together? Are we? Okay. All right. So, I'm thinking about, did you have your hand up? Context matters all the time because context has to do with the environment that you're in. And so context can be relevant to the trauma. In this case, staying with Job, Job prayed, his practices were, his rituals and practices were, he always, the words that he prayed for his family, his children. He thanked God. He did everything right. Like some of us right here. You go to church every Sunday. You do good things for other people. You know, you care, you love. And even with the best that you do, we can't avoid life because life happens. And it don't always happen according to how we assume or think it should happen. And then what happened is we wind up beginning to, once our beliefs and value systems are challenged by a traumatic experience, we then begin to, all of the stuff that we learned back in the church from grandma, from grandpa, from everything else, and then we experience that trauma. It shakes people up. And they feel like this is not a safe context. This is not a safe space. I don't trust people. I've had a negative experience, whether in the hospital with the doctors or in the community or in the church or whatever. Like the lady said, the dog attack, you know. So shattered assumptions. Keep that in mind. Remember that. Because our faith will be challenged in this life. It is the way, according to the book of Job, it's just not going to be a piece of cake and a piece of pie. We are going to be challenged. Our assumptions about who God is, what the world is, and all of this is going to be challenged. Oftentimes, we're not ready for it. We're not ready for it. I want to insert this right here. Let's stay with this. That some of the hardest challenges I encounter is through people who I work with in the mental health clinic over at the VA who are experiencing PTSD and military sexual trauma. And then suicidal ideation, people thinking about suicide, killing themselves. So then for them, the self is not good because I want to kill it. Okay, that's one of the assumptions. I'm a good person, you know. But then you have a trauma and you get traumatized and you begin to question your own worth. Okay? Now, people do not question when there is a natural kind of trauma that affects everybody. People will say, well, you know, that's just the Lord doing. That's like a tornado or hurricane or earthquake or whatever else. People don't usually question it in the same way because it's a collective trauma. And one of our presenters were talking about that this morning, right? A collective trauma. So let's move over here. Now what we need is, we got some terms that we need to look at. And the terms are crisis, trauma, complex trauma, and trauma-informed care. Now, I want to grab my notes, and I think so. We need to. What is a crisis? And have you experienced a crisis? Well, you know what? A crisis is defined as actually a fork in the road where one way leads to challenge, and then the other road leads to something else. Okay? But you have to make a choice in a crisis. And so like somebody retiring from a career that they worked for 20, 30 years, that's a crisis. All right? Somebody who's having surgery or who's been told they're going to have to have surgery is a crisis. So here's a definition of crisis. A crisis is often an immediate, unpredictable event that occurs in people's lives. It's unpredictable. It's immediate. I have a colleague who just got detailed to the VA in Utah. In 2 weeks, she got to change everything because she got to go, you know. And so like a crisis. She's not thinking about it like a crisis, but it is a crisis because she got to take care of everything there, and then she got to get to a new place, new people, new context. So it's a crisis. So it's important for us to recognize when we are in crisis mode versus trauma mode. So a crisis is often an immediate, unpredictable event that occurs in people's lives, such as receiving a threatening medical diagnosis or experiencing a miscarriage or undergoing a divorce. That's a crisis. And that can overwhelm the ways that they naturally cope. So a crisis is like your ability to cope becomes overwhelmed with the situation that you're in. All right? But let's compare that to trauma. So trauma involves, and Dr. Brown definitely gave it to it, but here it is again. Trauma involves an emotional, mental, or physical response to a powerful negative experience. So like one of our panelists was talking about the dog that killed that lady. and how it impacted her. Secondary trauma. The person who was killed, that's like primary trauma, but she was traumatized, and we'll call that secondary trauma, because she was affected by what she saw and heard, what she observed, secondary trauma. So trauma is a negative experience, or it can be a series of situations in which people perceive that they or a loved one experience a serious psychological, physical, or emotional harm. All right, this definition comes from SAMHSA, and that's an acronym that stands for this. SAMHSA is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. All right, SAMHSA. And it's a government, but it's one of the leading authorities on trauma and trauma-informed care. All right, then we move to the definition of complex trauma. So complex trauma is chronic abuse, abandonment, the loss or the tragic loss of a loved one. Or it could be a war. I thought about all of the kids over there and the war going on with, particularly going on between Israel and the Palestinians, and all of the kids who are being killed, all of the people, 40,000 people, whatever. But that's one example of how people are living in trauma daily. What must it be like to live with trauma daily? Because you heard what Dr. Brown said. What cortisone does is it's the body's ability to excrete the necessary hormones to put us in fight or flight, to really prepare the body for combat, actually. And what happened when it don't happen and we stay in the ready state for hours and hours and hours, then what happened, the cortisone builds up in our right here. So you may notice that, now what I notice is that a lot of folks, especially a lot of us, a lot of black and brown people, we wind up with that right in here. Some of my white counterparts, they don't get it exactly like that. Now, I don't have the research stats to support that, but I can tell you that's my assessment or my observation. Say it like that, okay? I'm sure that the research will support it, all right? Yes?
So I'm curious to dive into what you're mentioning right now.
Yeah.
Is that referring to stomach problems? Is it referring to weight? Like, because the stomach is considered the second brain.
Yeah.
So
The guts, the bowels.
The gut.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
The bowels of our soul.
Yeah.
So what are you like referring to when you say right here?
Yeah, right here, like people's stomach protrude. Yeah. Because what that means is sometimes, like, it can be food, but what people are eating, but they're carrying the stress of their life in their stomach. That's where the cortisone manifests itself more often, right there in our stomach. Okay. So and you can the research will support what I'm saying about that. All right. So it's important for us to get some exercise to ward off that stress, because if we don't, it accumulates. High blood pressure, all kind of stuff happens as a result of us not taking care of ourselves. Now, my mind is going this way, folks. I hope that what I'm saying is helpful. And again, I'm going back to, this presentation was billed as a presentation on grief and loss. Okay, but I'm hoping, I just prepared it the way it came to me. I'm hoping you're okay with this, okay? I'm just being transparent. I'm being transparent, and I've learned that being transparent and being me is what matters. When I'm doing presentation, I got to do it that way, and so I can feel good about what I want to give to you. Okay, but look, here we go right here. We talk about primary trauma, secondary trauma. All right, and okay, I think I skipped something because trauma-informed care. You and I cannot care for folk who are traumatized unless we are able to recognize what the trauma is, that it is trauma, which is an assessment. That's the word, a clinical word that is used. But you may say, oh, that person just went through something bad, but that's also your assessment, which is good. I'm just saying that this is the language that's used, that you have to do an assessment. It can be an observation. It can be, because sometimes people use surveys, they use different tools to do their assessment. But we all need to have some type of theory to guide our practice. If we don't, then we're flying by the seat of our pants. That's what evidence-based research says. We do the best we can with what we have, all right? But it's important that we understand what is guiding whatever we do is called an intervention. Whatever we do, whatever we say, you know, you heard some of the people, they weren't using that language, but whatever you do is called an intervention. So you're responsible for making an assessment. And so using that language, an assessment, and then you need to do an intervention. So what we're going to do is, I think we will, let me say the last thing about this. I'm kind of jumping around. I'm aware of that. And some of that has to do with time. And I got a case study that's coming up. Vicarious trauma. All right. This is a transformation in the self of a helper that results from empathic engagement. Do y'all know what, like, empathic engagement is my ability to connect with somebody? You know what I'm saying? Like connecting with people when they know that you care, like you got good eye contact, you're using active listening skills, you're using your presence in a way that they see and know that you're with them. These are some of the skills that we need to be aware of that we're using in trauma-informed care, okay? So if we can't really name it, then it's not as helpful. We need to be able to name it. So vicarious trauma results in empathic engagement with trauma survivors. Empathic engagement. We connect, not like, hi, how you doing, and we're gonna move on, but empathic engagement. And then we come to shared trauma. Well, shared trauma has to do with, like the example was used about COVID. Even though you may not have gotten COVID-19, the fact that the world got it, it's shared. So so we would say that we also experience trauma through the world because we became aware that COVID-19 existed, and COVID-19 changed the world and definitely impacted how the church operate. All right? All right. So in the last term I want to define is PTSD. Y'all, we hear that a lot, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. All right? So it's a psychiatric disorder that may occur in people who have experienced or witnessed a traumatic event. Now remember, there were several people, I think one of the pastors said something about homicides, suicides, that kind of trauma. Yeah. is important. So now at the VA, what we basically do, any of the vets who come in there who say that they're experiencing suicidal ideation, they're taken serious, and they are admitted, because we had a couple of incidents in which folk weren't taken seriously and they committed suicide. People lost their jobs because they didn't honor what they heard the person say to them, that they were dealing with suicidal ideation. So let me go back to this, because the key is in the book of Job. The world is what? Benevolent. A good place to live. The world is meaningful. You're having fun. You're enjoying yourself. You're moving around and everything is good. Okay. And what's the third one? The self is worthy. So when you're dealing with people who are dealing with major depression, ideation, do you think the self is worthy? Or pedophiles or people who are raping someone, is the self worthy? No, it's not. So the assumption is that people are worthy, the self is worthy. I should say the self is worthy. The world is meaningful. Okay, this one works. This one works. Yeah, good. Thank you. All right. So let me move into this case that deals with, and this is a pseudo name, Mary Johnson, okay? So I want to use the case study approach so that we can actually integrate what I've shared with you with an actual person in the church who's dealing with trauma. Can we do that? Yeah. All right. Okay. I'm giving y'all a lot of papers, but it's okay. I want to do this over here, do this. Actually, see what you got right there. All right. Everybody got a case? Dr. Palmer, you got one back there? You got a case? So this case study encourages a nuanced approach to mental health and trauma within the cultural and spiritual framework of the Black church. All right? Okay, thank you. I want to share one thing right here. It's personal, but I need to share this as we move on. Most people don't know this. I haven't even talked about it, but I'm talking about it now. So I'm visually impaired. Although I wear glasses, you would not know that my vision is as bad as it is. So sometimes I can come off looking a little peculiar and weird to folk because they can't trying to figure me out. Like Dr. McKenzie, he knows. He knows about it, right? And it is my way of adapting to the world that I live in and the environment that I work in, you know. But most people wouldn't know that if I didn't tell them. So you see me scrunching here, and that's why I need readers to help out with this case. So again, the case study encourages a nuanced approach to mental health and trauma within the cultural and spiritual framework of the Black church, fostering an environment where both faith and psychological principles contribute to healing and resilience. And that is what, remember now, that's what Dr. Bryant talked about last night. She preached that last night. She integrated mental health with preaching. You know, she sure did. So now what I need is, we got a case. I need some readers to just read. If I could get a volunteer to read the background. This case is a trauma-informed case workshop. This is about Mary Johnson. It's a pseudo name. Yes. Yes. Okay, let's keep reading. Can I get a second reader?
Mary presenting issues. Mary reports feelings of persistent sadness, anxiety.
We do have people online, so that's why I'm trying to get the mic to you.
And episodes of dissociation that she has not previously disclosed to anyone due to the stigma around mental health in her community. She mentions feelings on edge and having trouble sleeping, which she attributes to the chronic stress and racial trauma experienced over her lifetime. Mary also expresses concern about her son, who is showing signs of behavioral issues in school.
Okay, thank you. So the medical and social history.
Mary has never sought psychological help before, partly due to fear of discrimination and her own beliefs about mental health treatment. She has been a pillar in her community, often involved in church activities and local charities. Mary is a widow, her husband having passed away 5 years ago, which added to her emotional burden.
Okay, thank you all. Now we will move into, we'll look at these discussion points. Let's look at the first one, understanding and assessing trauma. Yes.
Understanding and assessing trauma. How can we effectively and respectfully ask Mary about her past experiences, including exposure to racial trauma and community violence, to better understand her needs?
All right, very good. And would, Doc, would you read the second question as well?
And then second, what are some culturally competent tools and techniques that can be used to assess trauma without causing further harm or discomfort?
Okay. So, this is our work to do now. Mary has been presented to you. Reread the case. Look at Mary, what she's dealing with. Okay. Just remember, since this is a trauma-informed workshop, we're looking at grief, but we also we got to look at trauma. Yes, sir. Yes, please.
We didn't talk about this, but I know it's probably a thing, is she's dealing with what I see buried trauma.
Say that again.
Buried trauma. With some of the stuff that she's been dealing with.
Buried.
Buried.
Oh, buried.
Buried, yes.
Buried.
Yeah. So stuff keeps
What clues give you that? What clues? Point them out.
Number one, for example, she's involved in church and in charities, but it's like she's never really dealt with the emotional aspects of her husband dying.
Okay.
That was 5 years earlier.
So that's, yeah, okay, so there's definitely grief and bereavement, and so how is Mary doing? So that's important that you just...
So, you talk about her anxiety and some of the things that she's been dealing with physically and mentally, like she's been kind of going and keep, as she's dealing with stuff, just keep pushing it down.
Pushing it down.
Trying to go in spite of, dealing with what she's actually needs to deal with.
Okay. Okay. That's a fair assessment given the data that is presented about Mary. Are we good? We okay? Okay.
There's another observation to veggie back, because I don't eat pork, so I don't piggyback. I'll veggie back on what you said. It says, Mary, she mentions feeling on edge and having trouble sleeping, which she attributes to the chronic stress and racial trauma experienced over her lifetime. How long has she had trouble sleeping?
Okay.
Because we supposed to be resting, right?
Right.
If you can't rest, your body, your mind is never in a state of actual like relaxation or homeostasis even.
Yes.
So how long has she had trouble sleeping?
That's part of the assessment. That's part of your assessment, and that's important. About her sleep habits and how long. So in one way, we look at the DSM-5. It looks at duration, intensity, and Dr. Brown, tell me the other one. Duration, frequency. So your question would be framed this way: how frequent? What's the duration? All right, and the intensity. Okay, and keep that in mind. Those three things are very important in assessment: frequency, intensity, and duration of whatever. I'm not sleeping. I'm not eating. I'm in pain. Whatever. Those are the three questions that are going to be raised in the assessment. Okay. To assess, you got to listen for, those are symptoms. Those are like, okay, she's not sleeping. That's a symptom of what? Insomnia or whatever else. Okay. So, am I making sense to you? All right. So let's go to the second question then. That's good. Let's go to the second question. Any comments on the second question? Frequency, intensity, and duration. When you go to your doctor want to know those three things. If he or she don't ask, believe me, it's in his or her mind. Intensity. How intense is what you're experiencing to you? Only you can say what that is. How frequent are you having those symptoms? All right. And what is the duration? When did it start? And when does it stop? So that's very, very important, okay? All right. So, but one thing that came out is Mary is definitely grieving and she's experiencing trauma. Let's go to the second question. What do you see here?
Looking at the second question, what are some culturally competent tools and techniques that can be used? One of the things that we could do, because we're under the assumption that Mary has not had any type of therapy or counseling. But we do know that there was some issues in her childhood. Okay. So we could look at the family history by doing maybe a genogram or something like that to look at some of the issues that may have been presented in other family members, to see if some of those things, those characteristics, and some of that background information also fall from a family background in the bloodline.
Right. Now, what you just shared is really good, and so it raised in my mind one very, very important thing, and that is working collaboratively with the people we serve. We're working one-on-one with Mary. We need to work collaboratively with her to hear her story, which will be a skill that we have. Some of us need some work with how to listen to folk, all right, and how to not make quick conclusions about stuff. We need to hear what they say about themselves, right? And so if you go to the doctor and the doctor is prescribing everything and he's not or she's not listening to your story and listening to what you're saying that's going on with your body, what do you think is going to happen? You can prescribe the wrong medicine, but you're not going to feel good because you're going to leave there saying your doctor's not listening to you. The minister is not listening to me. I need to be listened to. You need to hear what I'm saying. So we need to be able to ask good questions. We need to be thinking. Yes, ma'am.
When you said that we need to listen without the intent of responding, because we all tend to listen to respond.
Yes.
And I think in this case, eventually you'll respond. But right now, she just needs somebody to listen.
To listen. Now, I think the gentleman here was talking about, like in CPE, we use this thing, we talk about presence. How we show up with other people, working collaboratively with them. What that means is, okay, we are present, but you can have an anxious presence, or you can have a non-anxious presence. But when people are anxious and you come in there with your anxiety, it just escalates stuff. You got to de-escalate stuff so they feel safe. They feel like you're really listening to them, and they can be heard. They can be heard. I gotta remember to keep this thing up to my mouth. And people feel good about the doctor's visit or the visit with the pastor because they feel heard. Pastoral care is based on the talking cure. Pastors who know how to listen, which is a form of caring for folk, all right, is a way of addressing their grief, their crises, their traumas, whatever it is they're dealing with. But people need to experience that you're observing, eye contact, you're listening, you're not leading. It's an error when you and I take the conversation to where we want to take them. When they're coming to us with their maladies, with what they're experiencing, we need to listen to them, and the art is being able to be a companion and journey with them as they are sharing their story. And it takes a little more time than trying to fix people or trying to be a savior to folk, or trying to be a problem solver. Sometimes all folk want is for you to listen to them. I'm grieving. I had a pastor of a church who sent his one of his deacons to me. I also do counseling, and I'm working towards becoming. I'm almost there. A licensed professional counselor with the Board of Counseling of Virginia, and it's a different thing because counselors can diagnose. If you don't have a license, you can't diagnose and treat and whatever. And it is important to listen to make as accurate of a diagnosis as possible, but you got to do some assessments and you got to have some skills. And if you don't have it, what Dr. Brown said and what the doctor from Union Presbyterian Seminary says, refer. You and I need to know when to refer and what are the limits of our competency. But now let's go back to that question because we got a few more questions here. All right. So what do we need to understand about Mary culturally? Was that in there?
Because the question is, what are some culturally competent tools, right?
Tools, yeah.
So I have a question about a potential tool. Thank you. Last night, Dr. Bryant was talking about Hagar's experience as a slave.
Yes.
And the story deals with Abram being met by the angel of the Lord eating, right?
Yes.
Being told you're going to have a son, and Sarah hearing it and laughing from a distance. So the place of eating, the table,
yes,
is that a culturally competent tool to be able to help people to deal with people? Because, really, we go to the table for communion, right? So the ability to come and sit and eat together you know, in the Eastern world, it's kind of like a sacred moment. In the Western world, we sit in our car on the way somewhere. We have a bite. It's a different.
It's a custom.
Right.
It's a custom, right?
Yeah.
And that custom is particular to that context.
Yes.
In that situation, and so, but then we can in terms of understanding it in today's, what would be a custom today? Are you saying like maybe?
Hey, let's go get a bite to eat, or to talk. Sometimes people are a little more open to talk when you're at a table eating food.
Okay.
Or, you know, grandma saying, "Come on, baby, come and get something to eat," and it makes you feel better.
Okay. All right. Let me interject something. I'm saying that's on the table, but when we are working with people like Mary, how old do you think Mary is? Did the case tell us? She's 52. Tell me something. She's in a particular stage of life development at 52. What do you know or remember that a black woman, because she is a black woman, and we talk about cultural, because this is it, how would you assess then what people in that stage, especially a black woman, may be experiencing? Menopause. Okay, that's important. Because won't that affect your body and your mind? Okay, all right. Now, so we got to do some assessment. So somebody at 52 is in a different stage of life than somebody at 72. So you and I must study in our assessment, what must a person at this stage of development be experiencing? And a black woman at that. That has to be a part of your cultural assessment. Right. Because black men, we talk about a black woman, because that's what the case is about, right? So we want to assess this woman at this age. Now, what are like maybe a couple other things about culturally? Maybe one other thing culturally. We're gonna move to the next thing. What would you want to know? Come on now, you and I are black folk. What 52 years old? Some folk in here maybe beyond 52. I'm gonna raise my hand.
However, culturally, and it states that in the beginning, with everything that she had experienced in the low-income community, that she understood the violence within the community. And then on top of that, she even lost a sibling to death in her teenage years.
See, so we got to assess the losses that she's had early life.
Early, yes.
We got to assess that. Plus, her husband died 5 years ago.
5 years, yes.
All right, that got to be a part of that assessment because that involved grief.
Yes.
But now does she have like a son or a grandson who's
acting out in school?
Y'all got kids acting out in school?
Yes.
You got to go to school.
You gotta go to school.
You can't
That's
let them
right.
be there alone.
That's right.
With the school system,
That's
you got to.
right.
That's going to involve some time and energy, right?
Time and support. Yes.
High schooler? Is this a middle schooler? That was something that I noticed as well.
And I think also looking at her age at 52, and her husband passed 5 years ago, which means she was about 46. So that means that she had her son late in life, probably too. So she waited. And so there is also some stress with raising a child, losing the husband, but trying to figure out what those emotions are that the son is going through that's causing him to have some behavioral issues in school.
Okay. Now look, see, we're doing good. Now listen, this is important. Let us not make any assumptions. Let's listen to Mary, what Mary is telling us about her story and her life. That's the essence of what this is all about. Yeah.
I'll throw a loop in this real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
and don't take this the wrong way.
No.
Her husband died 5 years ago, correct? So
Right.
she's a widow, but she has a son.
Right.
Did it ever say that the son was her actual? So, because I was going to say that she might be a single mother, but she
Okay.
may not actually be a single mother because it doesn't necessarily say that the son was her husband's son.
Right.
So that could be another
Right.
wrinkle that kind of goes into it. Where
But whatever we do, that's an observation. You can check it out with Mary. Check it out with Mary. Don't assume anything because it could be wrong. And we want to be fair and honest to Mary because she's in our care. All right? So God has given her to us to care for her during her time of traumatization and crisis and so forth, okay? But do you hear what I'm saying? Like your role, our role with working with people who are in crisis and dealing with trauma is critical because the people are there. They don't feel like the world is safe. The world ain't good. The church ain't good. Family, I got trouble with the family. And we need to be able to hear their stories without passing judgment on them. And when people also say, you know what, I got a problem with God. Preacher, you don't have to, God don't need you and I to defend God. God don't need that. What God needs us to do is listen with these two ears. All right? We need to do our assessment and have some observation. We need to know how to ask good questions. We got to think. Open-ended questions, closed-ended questions, that kind of stuff. If you just want to gather some information from folk, you just ask them closed-ended questions, yes or no. But if you want them to talk, you ask them open-ended questions to get them to go where they want to go, and then you have to follow them. And that's the skill of a good practitioner, person who is doing this kind of work. To be able to go with people and be with them as they're going through the valley of the shadow of death. And you can walk with them as they're walking through the valley of the shadow of death. Man, I will never forget you. I was experiencing, oh my God. And you know what? You didn't try to fix me. You didn't try to save me. You just listened to me, and that's what I needed. And that is the healing. That's the healing. Healing comes from the inside. Not from out there somewhere, you know, like they give us some medication and stuff like that. But the true healing that God has given us is inside of each of us. Now, we need to take the medicine too, because that's an aid. All right? But healing comes from the inside. All right? And so, y'all went through seminary, you know about the wounded healer? And you can't heal anybody unless you've been healed. Wounded healers cannot heal folk. People who have experienced healing, who have been wounded, can heal folks because they can be empathetic and compassionate with folk. It makes sense? All right. Yes, ma'am.
I was just going to say, because she's in her community, she's known in her community, she's affluent, you know, in her church, needing a space to be super confidential because she may not want a lot of things out there. So helping her to understand what's a space for you that's important for you so we can continue to work with you.
Okay. Now, I heard something. In addition, I want to flag that. Let me tell you what I heard. Look, because of COVID, now this is my assessment, because of COVID-19, the black church and the black community, black and brown communities, people are, right now, it's not like yeah, there's a stigma. I'm going to see a counselor. Because most folks say, okay, I want to send you to the pastor. And the pastor has, by the state law, the pastor has an obligation and responsibility to his or her flock to provide counseling. All right? And now we're talking about a different type of counseling that is needed. So we need to know when to refer, when we have reached the limit of our competency. And we need to refer because we do not want to hurt other people. we want to help them because they came to us for healing. You know, that's important. Now I realize that the time is up upon us. And you know what? I don't see anybody. Oh. Oh. Woo! Look, you know what? Look, let me tell you what. I would love for y'all to just stay and do the second part right here, because this case, we're going to learn something from this case. This is important with working with folk in the church. I have a church that's asked me to come and help the diaconate ministry with grief, because so many people are dying at the church, and they got a responsibility of working with the families. You know, and they're struggling with, well, what do we say and what do we do? And I, you know, and part of me is saying, listen, first thing first, it's you got it. Do you have any grief that you're dealing with? Because if we don't take care of that first and talk about that first, you're going to trip up trying to help this other person who's dealing with their grief. Okay? So I got to get them to open up and talk first and understand that their grief that they're experiencing is very important, because until they actually do something about it, they can't be as effective as they want helping other people deal with their grief. Does it make sense? Yes. All right, so I got some folks saying, well, I don't know now. I don't know. But remember, a wounded healer cannot heal effectively. And people, pastors, ministers, those of us here, if we're experiencing, you know, some wounds, we either need to find a good relationship, a good therapist, a good counselor to talk to. See, the thing about that is that the law protects you. They break anything, they can lose their license. And besides, the profession really want people to feel that professional counseling is a good, viable option for people when they're dealing with it. Now people say, okay, well, again, I don't have a whole lot of money to do that, you know, insurance take care of it, whatever else. But every teacher need a teacher. Every pastor need a pastor. Every counselor need a counselor. All right. So let me do this right here. Let's look at this. We did cultural sensitivity and stigma. What is there a stigma to you going to counseling? Would your family, if your family members know you're going to counseling, would they be okay with that? I got three hands, right? Yeah, right there.
Please.
I would say in my family, it used to be a stigma, but I could care less in the sense that because hurt people.
Yeah.
Because my daughter experienced mental crises in middle school because she was molested in the church by a young man that was in my youth group. And I had no clue till she was in 8th grade. I had a choice as a mother. It wasn't about me being a youth minister. It was a choice as a mother, and the choice was to get counseling. And out of that, the whole family needed counseling. So
right.
I didn't care what people thought.
Okay.
And people did look at me crazy. I did feel the stares. You can feel it, but I didn't care.
Yeah. You were free. You're free, and you've matured and evolved to the place where, hey, look, my daughter is more important than what y'all think about me. Okay? Yes.
I think for me, growing up, because a lot of trauma happened in the church, that the stigma was whatever happens in the church, in your local church, same thing like it was in the home, stayed in the home. So a lot of times you had to hide, mask, different things, and then you grow up and become my age, and you're still dealing with the trauma and serving in the place where you were hurt. So that's a great challenge I have.
I would say
Thank
in
you.
my family
Thank
the
you.
same thing. It was definitely a stigma. Definitely, I could remember different things happening within my grandfather's house as a young girl, and I could see things, but first of all, the young person stay in a young person's place. And if you said something about it, it was an issue. But I believe now in my family, as we've gotten older, more people, because of childhood trauma, are seeing counselors. And then we are noticing that even with the younger kids, with different things that may come up or different things they have experienced, we are all like, okay, that maybe they need to go see a therapist. And so now, I would say now it's a little different.
So, me personally, my personal experience, I'm a pastor's son. When my parents were dealing with me as a child, like having issues in school and sometimes in church, they did send me to a psychoanalyst. And so some people, I think, and depending on your generation, were comfortable with therapy. I do want to share that. I believe that sometimes the church can become a space where the need for mental health work is shrouded, because if you're going against the abilities of God to deliver you and pray through, it seems as if you're being sacrilegious or blasphemous to say that God can't deliver you when in fact, there are tools or people available to help. So it's a little bit of a duality. Yeah.
Definitely. Okay. Thank you. Doctor.
You can find Dr. Simmons later if you have other questions. We're going to transition workshop. So these are your options. Domestic violence in the chapel, race-related stress in classroom 1, veterans in classroom 6. All right, thank you, Dr. Simmons.
Now, if they want to stay here, no, they're going to
have a whole new group of people.
Oh, a whole new group of people. Oh, sure, okay.
So everybody who's been in this session can move to a different one.
Okay. If they don't want to move, can they stay, or you prefer that they move? Yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
Something with Congress, let me know.
I'm responsible for spiritual assessment. They can't do that. They're going to have the training. And so the VA is kind of like, okay, stay in your lane. All right, so stay in my lane, then I have to make contributions to the team. I have to do spiritual assessment on every new person that comes into the unit, you know, and there's a format for that I follow, that I must follow, and those notes are then electronically uploaded into the patient's record. So what I say in my assessment, the other team members can see and read. And so I need to be very, very accurate and confident about what I do, because they're looking for me to be the subject matter expert when it comes to spiritual assessment. All right. So and I love that because I'm working with these other professionals from other disciplines, social workers, psychologists, and stuff like that. And I get a chance to experience and see how they work and what their contributions is, and vice versa, and they see mine. All right. So this workshop is trauma-informed care is, okay, want me to get Can you hear me? All right, okay, I'm going to try to keep it up there. All right. Trauma. I developed a course at the seminary for trauma, Bible, and care. What's the relationship? Are there examples in the Bible of trauma and people experiencing traumatic life experiences? So I turn my attention to Job. All right? Job, and we will see that in Job not only experienced trauma, and in the book of Job, we'll see how he managed to get through the trauma. So you and I experienced trauma. Then it's a matter of what aid did we receive regarding the trauma that we experienced. So when I approached the book of Job, I listed three scriptures. All right? Now the rationale for these particular scriptures, they were perfectly selected, all right, because they will illustrate the point that is important regarding trauma that I'm going to make. So in Job chapter 1, verses 1 through 3, what we see is that Job is a very rich man. And he's wealthy. He has a large family. Y'all know the story. All right? Knows the story and everything. And so, you know, then you hear the dialogue between God and Satan. And of course, God says, have you considered my servant Job? Job is a good man. He's pious. He worshiped God. He prayed every day. He gave alms. He took care of his family, whatever else. Thousands of sheep and camel and so forth. And so the first assumption, and there are three, the first assumption is that the world is good. I'm going to do like the preacher said. Can y'all say that? The world is good. Okay. That's the first assumption. Because the way the book presents itself, Job is doing very good and the world is good to him. All right? And then we move to the second reading. All right? The second reading is from Job. I can't hardly see that. All right, Job 8, 1 through 7. All right? And if you read that, and I'm okay with somebody if you got it, anybody can have it on your phone, you can read that. But the second assumption is the world is meaningful. All right, now the world is meaningful. Now keep in mind, we're talking about trauma. The world is good. The world is meaningful. And the third assumption is that Job is saying, hey, it's like, I'm a good man. I do all of the right things. I want to be in God's good grace. So I'm going to pay my tithes. I'm going to worship. I pray. I fast. I do all of the things that these practices would align me and put me in favor with God. All right? So the self is good. You get that? Self is good. All right. Then the story changed for Job and his wife. Job lost everything. And what Job experienced was, number one, the world is not good. Has the world always been good to you? I want to make it personal. All right? The second assumption is the world is meaningful. Has the world always been meaningful to you? Or maybe we need to find what meaningful is. What would you say, give an example of what meaningful means to you? When in that context, the world is meaningful. Do you go, your daily life, you go and enjoy and do what you want to do? All right, y'all thinking about it now. It's not a trick question, I guarantee you that. All right, the world is meaningful. Right. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. They go the opposite way. Very thoughtful. Uh-huh. Okay. All right. Anybody else right there? Just think about it now. Look, if it don't make sense, I want it to make sense, and I want you to appropriate and make it personal, because it is personal. It is the word question is. But there are three assumptions that are made in the book of Job. The first one is that the world is good. The second is that the world is meaningful. And then the third is the self is worthy. Okay? The self is worthy. All right? And self is worthy has to do with how a person sees himself. You see yourself as a person of self-worth. A person who has, how do you see yourself? That's the important thing. So now, this is important. For example, I'll move ahead with Job. When things turned bad for Job, and Job's friends heard about how life had changed for him, the word said they left their place and came to Job. And they sat with Job 6 nights in silence, sitting with their friends. And then on the seventh day, they talked. All right? So now, Job has boils on him according to the word. Now, his friends had gathered with him and consoling him, in silence until the seventh day. All right? And so Job had experienced trauma in his life because he lost his children. His 7 sons, I think it was 7 sons,